All right, I'm back. Let's go over our 10th edition rules for Custodes here. Just as a preface, I'm fairly positive on our rules. I think that they're good. There are like individual units that are disappointing, but overall, I think that our army is going to be pretty strong and also pretty representative of how Custodes should play on the table. Getting into the actual rules here, so our army rule is the martial katas. So the stances, they're back from the previous edition. They're way streamlined, so there's no, setting them up in advance and then picking one of the two and then sort of making your way through them in a certain order. That that concept just doesn't exist anymore. All it is at the start of the fight phase, you select a stance. Every unit in your army benefits from that stance. And these stances are Kaptaris, so -1 to hit in melee. Dakatari, you have sustained hits in melee, and then Rendax, you have lethal hits in melee. So it's largely just going to boil down to, do I need to hit really hard, and I'm fighting units that I'm wounding on 4s or 3s? You're going to take Dakatari. Are you looking to kill things like monsters and vehicles? You're probably going to take Rendax for lethal hits. And then if you're just looking to survive, or you need to hold a point to score or something like that, then you would take Kaptaris. Moving on to our shield host rule. So this is our detachment rule. It's the Emperor's Chosen 4-up against mortal wounds. When I first saw this, I was a little disappointed, or like at least underwhelmed, because it's it's the same rules before, and it's with the psychic phase being removed, you would think that there's less mortals. After playing, we need this rule. you need this. The devastating wounds are just absurd. So we need this rule. If anything, I'm disappointed that this is a detachment rule, because from my understanding, as the edition ages and Codex is released, I'm not sure the army rule will change. We might just get detachment options, but you'd have to make a pretty good detachment to pass this up, because I don't know how the army survives without it. So I think that there was a universe where this should have been the army rule, which would have been very boring, but it would have been fine. And then the katas are a detachment, because also the katas lean you. They only revolve around melee, so they could have made a new detachment that had to do with being a more rounded army with shooting in melee, and then you can retain the 4-up against mortals. But anyways, moving on. Stratagems. Most of these are actually returning stratagems, or like a very similar stratagem that existed before. So we have Slayers of Nightmares. It's +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles. This used to be +1 to wound against something tougher than you, but that effectively was a monster or a vehicle. So basically a returning stratagem. For 2 CP, we have Unwavering Sentinels. This one is excellent. You fight first. So this isn't an interrupt. This is you fight first. It's 2 CP, and it's also important to know that you still follow sort of the regular procedure of combat. So if you have a unit with fights first, and then a separate unit that use the stratagem to fight first, if both of those units were charged by your opponent, you won't get to fight with both of them before your opponent fights with either of them. You're going to have to pick one. But it's still very valuable. Avenge of the Fallen. This is, you have +1 attack if you've lost a model, and then +2 attacks if you are at half strength or lower. It's a returning stratagem. I think that the style, that the way this version of Custodes wants to play, I think this is even more valuable than before, because you actually want to take larger units. Then Arcane Genetic Alchemy. This is basically the new version of Transhuman across all armies. It's actually no, sorry, this is not that. This is just -1 damage. It's not -1 to wound. That is attached to a different data sheet though. So this is 2 CP -1 damage. It's situationally good. I don't think it's as good as having a transhuman type ability, but if you're about to get hit by 1,000,000 2 damage weapons, then it could be worth it to spend 2 CP and effectively take half damage. Moving on, we have Vigil Unending. You return a model to a unit, but that unit can only be affected by the stratagem once a game. It's in the command phase, so what you could do is do something like you move a unit out, they got shot during your opponent's turn, you pull like a back model or two, and then in your command phase you bring a model in the front, and then you're effectively gaining 2 or 3 inches of distance. And then Sworn Guardians, you can sticky an objective. It's a little unfortunate that you can't do it with Sisters of Silence because they traditionally are your more backfield objective holders. So it would be nice sort of late into the game if you have a unit of Vigilators or something on your home point, you can sticky it and move and charge something just to delay your opponent or score some primary objective points late in the game. But alas, it's okay. It's probably the most situational stratagem, but it's fine. The enhancements, we have Unstoppable Destroyer. This is probably the weakest one, in my opinion. You charge, and you do some mortals, and then once a game, you can make it so every unit within 6, after you complete a charge, has to take a Battle Shock test. It's fine. Don't have much else to say. Veiled Blade, you have +2 attacks, and once a game, you can triple your OC. I like this one. It's probably not my first choice, but you're going to want to have quite a few characters in this army. I think most of the time, you're going to have 3 characters. One of those being Trajan, and one of the 2 should probably have the Veiled Blade, in my opinion. Inspirational Exemplar, you get +1 leadership, so you have a 5-up instead of a 6-up, and then once a game, you can pick a unit within 12 in any phase and un-Battle Shock them, basically. This one's very cheap. I think this one's like 10 points or something, and it's good. For 10 points, it's good. If you just have the extra points and you don't want to take another enhancement, I think it's very situational, but once a game, being able to use stratagems on a unit that's Battle Shock, basically, is good. And then Ceaseless Hunter, this is kind of the all-star one. It is the most expensive one at 30 points, but it gives you fallback, shoot, and charge. And then once a game, you can move when your opponent moves within 9 inches of you. This one it's the trickiest one, and it's probably the best one. I think this one, like something like a Blade Champion, is very powerful. Moving on to the actual units. Custodian Guard, I'm not going to read like every single rule. I'm just going to kind of give my overall impressions here. Custodian Guard are like huge. They got a huge glow up because they have 5 attacks now with the spear. So, and the spear pretty much stayed the same. It lost a point of AP, but that's consistent across the entire game, so that's fine. This unit now has 5 attacks, re-rolling all their wounds, like very often, because this is your battle line objective holding unit, and they re-roll all wounds when you are on the objective, which is actually probably better than if your opponent is on the objective, because you don't have control over your opponent's positioning. You only have control over where your models are, and you can probably find a way to get them on an objective and to fight something. And then you reroll all your wounds. And with each guy getting 5 attacks and rerolling all their wounds, they hit very hard. The only kind of like bizarre thing is that I actually think you'll very rarely use the lethal hits stance, because if you're rerolling all your wounds anyways, it's probably better to just generate more attacks than to automatically wound on 6s. But maybe if you're you're fighting something that's like a really high toughness or whatever. And then we have Sentinel Storm. Once a game, they can double shoot. Nothing crazy, but it's good to have. I think the only bizarre part of this unit is their size limitations. So the minimum is 4, which is different. It used to be 3, and the max is obviously 10. But you have to take them in these increments. So it's 4, 5, 9, or 10. Realistically, I think you'll only see 4 or 10. I think that you'll either take a minimum squad just to kind of run around and do their own thing. They're fairly self-sufficient with rerolling their wounds and having a ton of attacks sitting on 2s. They definitely do not need a character, but they benefit from one, especially if you take 10. My current loadout is 10 with the Blade Champion with Ceaseless Hunter, because you have this gigantic unit that can move, advance, rerolling the advance, and then charge, rerolling the charge. I think that's really good, and I've had a lot of success with it so far. Wardens, so again, they're basically the same, just their data sheet rules change. They basically have transhuman if they have a character in the unit. So if the strength of the attack is greater than their toughness, they're -1 to be wounded. And once a game for a phase, they have a 4-up feel no pain, which is also very good. What's nice about this unit is the way it interacts with the fight first stratagem, where if you're charged by 2 enemy units into 2 of your units, so let's say your big unit of Custodian Guard is charged, and then in a different area of the board your Wardens are charged, you could probably get away with interrupting with the Custodian Guard and letting this unit be hit first, but popping their 4-up feel no pain. And they'll probably live to be able to swing anyways. Wardens, their size is 3 or 6. There's no in between. I think 6 with Trajan is good. That's what I'm running right now. And then the Alaris Custodians. If I had to pick one unit that got the biggest glow up, it's definitely Alaris Custodians. So their grenade launchers, D6 shots, blast now. It lost quite a bit of AP and strength, but it gained a lot of shots. Blast is also just like a stupidly broken keyword right now. This unit, even like 5 shooting at a unit of 10, whatever of your opponent's infantry, they probably just murder the whole squad. Because you're getting 2 shots per model from the spear, and then D6 plus 2 for each grenade launcher. So they have a ton of anti-infantry firepower. If they get in combat, their spears are great because they're also, just like Custodian Guard, they're very often going to be re-rolling their wounds. Another thing I want to mention is that character. The keywords from a unit is the culmination of all the keywords in the unit. So if a character is in a unit of infantry, that infantry unit is a character. So you can reroll your wounds against them with Alaris. I played a game with Alaris Terminators, and I was never not rerolling my wounds. I rerolled wounds every time I attacked anything. And then their other ability is you remove them from the board at the end of your opponent's turn, and then in your movement phase, you come on the board. Also excellent because you can deploy them on the board, and your opponent kind of has to respect them. But then whenever you want, you just pull them off the end of your opponent's turn and bring them back on the board. This unit is amazing. There's not much else to say. This unit is super good. They're 65 a model, and it's just a steal. Like they're fantastic. Next we have the bikes. So I think the bikes are kind of the one unit everyone knows is a little bit underwhelming. The salvo launcher, relative to the toughness gains of vehicles, is just not a very lethal weapon against vehicles. It's going to be wounding on 4s and actually very often 5s. And its AP is 2, which is much worse than before, and its damage is 3, which is also much worse than before. So literally every part of the salvo launcher is worse. It does less damage, its strength relative to the game is lower, its AP is lower, so it's just worse. They have the auto 6 advance still, and they have this sort of bizarre rule where if they advance and they pass over a unit, they kind of bomb them and they do mortal wounds, or however you want to think about it. Again, that rule is kind of bizarre because you don't really want to advance this unit. Like, their weapon is an assault. Like, you want to be moving and shooting and charging probably as much as possible. I could see using 2 as kind of like this hit and run unit, maybe with the bike captain, like we'll get to later. But yeah, I'm not huge on the bikes. I think you could skip them most of the time. Prosecutors, they have a 3-up feel no pain against psychic attacks, and they can get precision and devastating wounds against characters. They're against psychers. They're kind of the same. They're a backfield like objective holding unit. How often you actually use their datasheet abilities is probably not going to go up very much. Just like before, right? You might use the deny stratagem, which obviously doesn't exist anymore, but they kind of just sit around. Vigilators, I think for the points difference, unless you're like really strapped for points, Vigilators are just better than prosecutors. You're paying like 20 more points, I want to say. Let me double check here. From 50 to 75 points. So 25 more points, but you're getting a unit that actually does like substantial melee damage. And they're -1 to hit in melee. So as my backline holding objective unit, I actually like the Vigilators, but obviously if you don't have points, you just take whatever you can take. And then Witch Seekers, their Flamer lost AP, and they don't have their whole scout move thing anymore. Actually, sorry, they do have scout move, but to me, they're just not as valuable as before. I believe they're also a little bit more points than before, or they're kind of the same price as the Vigilators. So personally, I'll take Vigilators. Next, we have the regular shield captain. This guy also got a glow up just because his data sheet ability is great. So you can get 2 stances, and then once a game, you have all the stances for a unit. If you're just looking to kill things, you can have lethal hits and exploding hits. And then if you think you're going to get hit and then you want to hit back, obviously you can be -1 to hit and have sustained hits or something like that. And then the second datasheet ability, Strategic Mastery. Once per battle round, his unit can be targeted for stratagem for 0 CP. Even if you already use another one, this can be fights first. If there's a lot of combats going on, then you could use fights first again, which is very good. This is more of like a, two armies have been engaged with one another for a while, and then you can fights first twice, and you actually get value out of it. Next, the Blade Champion. This guy's the GOAT. This guy's my sort of go-to character. In this codex, he has reroll advances and reroll charges. Both of those abilities are good, and then once a game he can advance and charge. Fantastic. The only not so amazing, like, this ability is good, don't get me wrong, heroic for free because heroic is 2, but it's just heroic in general is much weaker this edition because your opponent actually has to charge something to be heroic. You can't just stand on a point and heroic things that come near you. That's not how it works anymore. Next we have Alea. She buffs up Sisters of Silence units. She has actually a surprisingly good melee weapon. Her unit also has fights first, so you have even more fights first going on. And yeah, that's her. She can join any of the Sisters of Silence units. I don't know if you'd actually want to take a large Sisters of Silence unit. Like, I don't know if you want something like 10 Vigilators and Alea. It's pretty cheap, like 150 plus 80. So what? 230 points for Alea and 10 Vigilators. That could be okay, but for me, I like my Sisters units as more sort of utility backline objective holding units than something that actually gets involved in the game and fights. We have a Rhino. It's a Rhino. It has a 3-up against psychic attacks, but it's just a Rhino. Knight Senshira. She increases the speed of the unit, so doesn't have the fights first ability that Alea does, but increases the speed of the unit. She can also join all the Sisters units. The Shield Captain and Terminator armor. So I've seen people say that they don't like this version of the Captain, or that he's the weakest because he doesn't buff the unit that much. I kind of disagree, because this Captain, Defiant to the Last, is pretty good, especially on a unit that's going to be playing pretty aggressively, which is the Terminators. They're going to be using their Gold and Light ability, and they're going to be playing basically in your opponent's deployment zone in a lot of games. So I think it's actually kind of likely that he dies and then he gets to fight, which is nice. And Strategic Mastery, again, on a unit that's going to be playing aggressively is nice as well, which all of the Shield Captains have. This guy is who I run the Veiled Blade on, because by being in the Alaris unit, he's re-rolling his wounds. So he has 9 attacks with a Guardian Spear re-rolling wounds. He hits like a truck. So I like this guy. The Shield Captain on Daniel Jet Bike. I think that if you're going to run bikes, I think 2 with this guy is probably the way to go, just because you have this mobile hit and run unit that has this interesting consolidate ability, and you can sort of move. Once we're about at the end of the fight phase, you get to make a normal move if you're no longer engaged. So I think that is probably the way to do it if you're going to run bikes. Personally, I wouldn't, but if you want to run bikes, 2 with the Shield Captain is probably the way to go. Next, we have the MVP Trajan. The only sort of huge change to him, or as far as changes go, his shooting's a little bit better. His melee is effectively the same, given the changes to AP across the game. The only thing is, I'm not 100% certain on this, but I feel like Moment Shackle is different, because I don't think you had to choose at the start of the turn before. I could be wrong, but now you have this. You have to say at the start of the fight phase what you want to do. So your opponent's going to know that. Let's say your opponent isn't sure if you're going to interrupt or not. Well, if you say, okay, I'm going to 12 attacks with Trajan, they probably know you're going to 12 attacks with Trajan, and then you're going to maybe use the fight first stratagem instead of the fight first ability. Or if you say, okay, I'm giving Trajan a 2 of it, well, they probably know you're going to interrupt elsewhere now. Not that they can maybe do anything about it, but you have to know what your plan for the fight phase is before you pick your Moment Shackle ability, because you have to choose at the start. His other datasheet ability is Captain General, which is his unit just ignores all modifiers to any of their rolls or tests. So things like hit modifiers and wound modifiers, Trajan's unit just doesn't care about. He's also only 145 points, so you probably always use him. He obviously isn't quite as sort of army bending. He doesn't support the army as much as he used to, but he still has 6 attack at strength 10 with 3 damage. So you're probably going to use him. Valyrian isn't like completely useless anymore. 7 attacks at strength 8 is actually quite good at AP 3, which is higher than most things in the book. And his unit is -1 AP, so they basically have like Armor of Contempt on his unit, which is also really good. And then once per battle round, he gets like a free reroll, and he can make the roll a 6, so he can make it a lethal hit or what have you. It's quite good. The Venerable Contemptor, it's got its multi-melta. I actually kind of like this guy. He's not very expensive. I want to say he's 185, so he went up. I want to say 30 points, but he comes back to life, which is cool. His weapon is strength 12, which is actually going to be wounding vehicles on things like 3s and 4s. And multi-meltas are fine. It's still going to be a little bit tricky to get into 9-inch range with this guy, considering he's only moved 6. But still quite good. Land Raider. It's chunky. Its last cannons are better. And it has the... you can move and charge out of it. I think we're durable enough that we don't need the Land Raider, but I could see someone trying to make a list of the Land Raider work, and I think it probably can. I don't know if you need it, and it's probably more of like a meme thing to do, but it's probably fine. So that's it for the regular units. Let's go into the Forge World units really quick. The Guard with the Adressite Spears. I think that these are fine. They are pretty expensive though. So 5 Custodian Guard is 225, and 5 of these guys is 325. So we're paying 100 points for this, and the weapons, the melee weapons, the exact same. So you're just paying for the Melted Spears. I don't know. Personally, I think they're overcosted, so I wouldn't really use them. Sagittarium. They no longer have 2 different weapon profiles. They just have the heavy bolter profile, but has sustained hits, which isn't too bad. And they can sort of suppress a non-monster or vehicle unit to give them -1 to hit if they attack them. And then instead of having the beam profile on their guns, they have, once again, they can make their weapons have devastating wounds. Overall, I think these guys are a downgrade. I think that none of the stances really affecting shooting is a pretty big reason why these guys aren't super valuable. I think if they're around the same cost, or like literally the same cost as the Custodian Guard, I could see it, but you're paying 5 points more to be just like substantially worse in melee. Previously Sagittarium were worse than Custodian Guard in melee too, but they had 1 extra attack. Like they made 4 Misericordia attacks instead of 3 spear attacks and 1 Misericordia attack. Whereas now, a basic Custodian Guard has 5 attacks with the spear. So they're substantially better in melee. And their shooting is definitely worse, but it's not... Considering they can shoot twice, once during the game. I don't know. I think that they've kind of been outclassed a little bit. Moving on to the Aquilon. I think Aquilon are cool. I've always loved the models. I think they're awesome. But I just can't fathom why they made their fist worse. It was strength 10 before. And again, toughness in general went up this edition. And they made their weapon go down in strength. So I actually think if you run them, you just take the Talon for a ton of anti-infantry attacks. And you kind of send them after hordes with maybe... You just send them into hordes with Flamers and Talons. But... I don't know. They're also quite a few points. They're 230 for 3. So they're over 70 points a model. Whereas Alaris are 65. And I don't even really necessarily think you're getting a better model. So again, I think a little bit overcosted. And I think that they had an opportunity to give them a unique role if they made this the Solarite Power Gauntlet really high strength. Then you're like, okay, I have a unit for killing vehicles. But it's not, so I don't think it's really worth it. Next, the Achilles. This is probably my least favorite unit that they've shown because it is a melee vehicle that moves 6 inches. It doesn't matter what it does. Its weapon could be even better than it is, and it's still a melee vehicle that moves 6 inches. It's just never getting there. I've seen people say they think it's fine because it's cheap. No Custodes model should be good because it's cheap. I'm just going to be honest. From a design standpoint, that's not the army that Custodes is. Custodes is an elite army. So being like, well, the Dread Knight's crap, but it's cheap. It's like, well, why are you playing Custodes if you want to run a cheap 150-point Dread Knight you can just throw away and have it die? That's not really the point of the army. This should have been I don't know why they felt like they needed to make it so much slower. It moves, 2/3 the speed it used to, and its spear is, compared to its last rendition, it's worse. And again, vehicles only got more durable. So I think this guy is pretty bad. Again, if you want to run him because he's cheap, go right ahead. I don't think I'm going to run him. I think he just should be a better unit. Agamatis Custodians, these are the other version of the bikes. I don't mind these because they have more shots. Again, it's only AP 1 2 damage instead of, I think, AP 2 3 damage. But they also have like a Fire and Fade ability with Implacable Vanguard. They're quite expensive. Actually, I think they're around the same cost. 3 for 280. What are Virtus Paraders? 3 for 2. Okay, so they're 10 points more for 3. But I think there's actually an argument to take these guys instead of the other bikes, but I'd have to try them out. Just to kind of Fire and Fade and be annoying and then charge into combat when you have to. Venatari, they win the award for the coolest data sheet, and then you look at their points cost and you roll your eyes. They're really good. Okay, I mean, their shooting is worse. I'm not even going to look at the pistol because the pistol is just like kind of insulting, but the lance is strength 4, AP 1 2 damage, so it's the same as a Guardian Spear, like the bolter on a Guardian Spear. And the lance is again, just a Guardian Spear with the lance keyword, which is fantastic. Yeah, that's really good. They have a 2-up save built in now, so you don't need to take the shield. The shield just gives you a wound. And they can shoot and charge when they fall back. And once per game, they can rapid ingress for 0. And you can use it on multiple units. That's really good. I'm just going to be honest. 10 inch the movement. Obviously, the fly keyword kind of sucks. But these guys are like... the utility is there. I just don't think the utility is there for 235 points for a 3. Like, it's just not. If they were 210 for 3, maybe, because then you're paying slightly more than a Terminator for a more melee-focused kind of mobile unit, and I could see the argument for that, but 235 is just frankly too expensive. I don't think you'd run them. Next, we have the Palace Gravitack. The Palace Gravitack, it's just kind of cheap, and it's 120. I could see this being like your backline objective holder that actually does something over the game. It can shoot a little bit with devastating wounds. But other than that, not much to say for the Palace. The Telemon. I'm also a little disappointed by the Telemon. Again, it's move 8, which I think is around the same speed as it was before, so that's not horrible. It's still -1 damage. It sells a 4 invuln, which is all good. Like, it is pretty durable, but its guns just aren't that good. And with the new rules surrounding its fists, other than being able to have 2 twin plasma projectors, because these are sort of like attached to the fists, having 2 fists doesn't do anything. So you want a fist and a gun, but then the guns kind of suck. I'd probably just take the Storm Cannon because it's a lot of shots and has devastating wounds. That's the Accelerator could like pop a Terminator or 2, even though it's only AP 1, so they're going to be getting a 2 most of the time in cover. So I don't know. It's not super expensive at 235, but it's just kind of slow. It's kind of slow, and I think 5 attacks with it at AP2. Like this weapon used to be, I want to say, strength 16, AP3, damage 4, and you probably ran 2 fists and you got 6 attacks, and you could give it Eternal Penitent for 7. But now it's just, I don't know. I really wish that it either was way more melee focused and actually hit like a truck in melee, or it had much better guns. Because I want to say this is the same melee weapon that something like a Redemptor Dreadnought has, which is frankly kind of embarrassing. Like a Telemon should be way more elite of a unit than a Redemptor Dreadnought, but whatever. All right, the Cladius. This might be the best data sheet in the army, just in general. I don't know why so many units had their weapons nerfed. Like, again, the Telemon loses damage, loses AP. You look at the Arachnus Blaze Cannon, it doubled its shots, and on average its gun does more damage. It's fantastic. The Blaze Cannon is so good. It gets lethal hits when you target vehicles if it has the Blaze Cannon. That's not crazy considering you already have Twin Linked and your strength 12, but again, it's just a bonus. That's just a good thing to have. This is great. What makes it even better is that we're such a melee centric army. where our weapons are pretty well rounded. We're strength 7, that's good into infantry, and then if we need to kill vehicles, strength 7 rerolling against most vehicles is fine as well. And in addition to having lethal hits. So the blaze cannon, just having this 4-shot strength 12 weapon that averages what 5 or 6 damage a shot is fantastic. This can it can kill some vehicles. It can, kill the last Terminator or 2 in a unit, or just soften them up before they're charged. Excellent. I love this. I'm personally going to run 2. I'm going to run 2 every single time. The Cronus Grav Carrier. It's a transport in an army that I don't think wants a transport or needs a transport. So not much to say about that. Now we're into the super heavies, the big boys. This thing's 700 points. You can advance and charge with it, which is pretty cool. And it does have a lot of guns. It has 2 of the Arachnus heavy blaze cannons. So it shoots like 8. It's basically 2 Caladius tanks attached to one another. And then it has the 2 bolt launchers. So it has 12 plus 2d6 blast shots. Like, this thing actually has a ton of shooting. Like, I could almost see, considering a Caladius is what, 215? So 215. It's around the cost of 3 Caladius tanks? But it basically has the shooting of 3 Caladius tanks. So, or it's more like, 2.5 or something, if you consider the Spiculous bolt launcher. And it holds some models, so. Honestly, I think it's probably pretty good. Like, you could probably make a list of this thing. And then the Ares, it just also has 2 Arachnus heavy blaze cannons, and then the Arachnus Magna blaze cannon. For the points, again, 580. It's almost exactly the cost of 2 Caladius tanks, just slightly more, and it shoots like 2 Caladius tanks. So again, is there a world where you take a shooting list with 3 Caladius tanks and an Ares? Maybe that could be funny. The Galatus, again, it's a 6-inch move melee vehicle, so it's probably bad. But again, its weapon specifically against Terminators, its weapon is good. I think it's going to lose a lot of efficiency against things. Like, again, you go into a vehicle, it's like toughness 9, it's way worse. You're killing like hordes, it's way worse. I think it lost D6 shots on its flamer, but it's torrent now. But it's twin linked. Again, it's just disappointing because it's even more expensive than the Achilles, and it's just like, I just don't see it getting in combat. I just really don't see it. And that's it for our units. So I think overall our army is strong. It's just the only kind of disappointing part is after a day of theory crafting and playing a few matches with Custodes, I'm already set on what I want to play. Like, I already know the units that I think are good, which are generic Custodian Guard, Wardens, Terminators, and Caladius tanks, and the characters. Those are the good units. Obviously, Custodes doesn't have very many units, so that's like more than half of our data sheets or something. But after, I might fiddle around with the list. That's 3 Caladius tanks and the Ares, just for fun, essentially. But overall, I think that most of the Forge Roll data sheets are too expensive in the case of things like Venatari and Aquilon, or they are just bad and they need to be very cheap to be good, which is things like the Galatus or the Achilles. I wish that they just made them better. Like, I think the Achilles and the Galatus are just like move 8 or something. I don't know why Contemptors move 6, but here we are. Overall, I like the army. I think we're strong. Obviously, the addition is extremely unbalanced right now. If you've ever played a game against something like Eldar or Knights, it's just kind of a disaster. But the games I haven't played against those armies, I've found them really enjoyable, and I've been having a good time. So that's it. That's my review of the faction, and take it easy.